so far. I was caught and I was brought here from Africa. I'm a slave from a land so far. I was caught and I was brought here from Africa. Well, it was licks like fire from the white slave master every day. I down on my knees, weeks and weeks before we crossed the seas to reach in the West Indies. And then they make me work.
Yes, I work.
I said I work.
And I work.
Good
Lord, no pay.
Toil,
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 toil.
hard each day.
I'm dying. I'm crying, my God. Ooh, oh, oh, oh. Well, Lord, I want to be free. Cha. Many times I wanted to run, but the English slave master standing there with the gun, the gun, the gun. Oh, I know he will shoot to kill. So I stay and I pray, but I'm planning still. Yes, I study night and day how to break away. I got to make a brilliant escape. But every time I think about the whip and them dogs, my body that start to shake. He make me work.
Yes, I work.
I said I work.
Yes, I work.
Oh Lord,
Lord, no pay.
I toil,
Toil,
I toil,
toil,
I toil,
toil,
I toil,
toil,
I toil
hard each day.
I'm dying. Oh Lord, I want to be free. In my heart, there was much to say, and I hope that the boss would have listened to me someday. Although he knew my request was small, it was the sting of the whip there to answer me when I called. We had to chant and sing to express our feeling to that wicked and cruel man. That was the only medicine to make him listen. And it's so calypso began. He made me work.
Yes, I work.
I work.
And I work.
Oh Lord,
Lord, no pay.
I toil, I toil, I toil, I toil,
hard each day.
I'm dying, oh Lord. Crying to my God. Well, Lord, I want to be free, my God. Oh, Lord. And then times change in so many, many, many ways. Till one day, somebody said, free the bloody slaves. I was then put out on the street. I had no clothes, I had no food, I had no place to sleep. Lord, I had no education, no particular ambition. This I cannot conceal. Forgot my native culture. I live like a vulture. From the white man I had to steal because he made me work.
Yes, I work.
I work.
Yes, I work.
Oh Lord,
Lord, no pay.
I toil,
Toil, toil, hard each day.
I'm dying. I'm crying to my God. Well, Lord, I want to be free, my God. Oh, Lord. And the times change in so many, many, many ways. Till one day, somebody said, free the bloody slaves. I was then put out on the street. I had no clothes, I had no food, I had no place to sleep. Lord, I had no education, no particular ambition. This I cannot conceal. Forgot my native culture. I live like a vulture. From the white man I had to steal because he made me work.
Yes, I work.
I work.
Yes, I work.
Oh Lord,
Lord, no pay.
I toil,
Hard each day.
I'm dying. I'm oh Lord, I want to be free.
Oh Lord, I want to be free. The quintessential griot, the master himself, Slinger Francisco, Sparrow, a 1963 classic. Oh Lord, I want to be free. Because you make me work, no pay. Long before reparations was a household name, our poetic voices have been bellowing, perhaps in the wilderness, that reparations was due to us. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101, wherever you're joining us from, whether you're joining us from in Guyana or outside of Guyana. It's a significant day. Today's International Day of Remembrance for the victims of slavery, chattel slavery, and the transatlantic slave trade. We remember today that horror, the scars that are still with us today. And today at the United Nations, another step was taken to bring to the attention of the world something that they would want to forget. And that is that the legacy of slavery is still with us. in more negative ways than positive ways. Yes, out of slavery came a culture of resistance among Africans. It spawned movements across time, from the anti-slavery movement to the Pan-African movement, to the Black Power movement, to the reparations movement. We have sought, African people, to confront the demons and to confront the demon of slavery and its consequences. And in the process, we have developed new eyes and new gazes. We have developed musics of resistance, poems of resistance, languages of resistance, our own Creolese, the various variations of Creolese come out of that culture of resistance. So the Maroon culture, the culture of running away and not lying down and taking blows, Sparrow, in that treatise of enslavement, says, I tried to run away, but every time I see the dogs on them and the whips, I stay but a planning still to make a brilliant escape. Whether it's the Maroons in Suriname, or up in the hills in Jamaica, or in the bushes here, Baracara, and other such communities. We have confronted slavery itself and the consequences of slavery, and spawned an anti-slavery culture, an anti-oppression culture. But the negative consequences are still here with us. So today, at the United Nations, the president of Ghana took to the podium of the General Assembly of that body to introduce a resolution deeming slavery, the transatlantic slave trade, the most horrendous crime against humanity. Ipadiji organized a watch, and some of us watched that moment. Tonight, we want to talk, to discuss, because it might have gone unnoticed in Guyana. That should not surprise us. The media follow other things, and I love the media. I'm not striking against the media. I am saying that the culture of forgetting, the culture of silencing the African presence, the African past in Guyana is alive and well in what should have been the major news item of the day. In all the media were invited to this watch today. The rest of Guyana should have stopped today. All the social media outlets should have stopped. And turned their gaze towards that moment, but not so in our Guyana. It is criminal, near criminal in Guyana, to talk about the African past, but we are not giving up. We are going to talk about the African past, because the African past is Guyana's present and Guyana's future. The African past is Guyana's past, not all of Guyana's past, but a central aspect of our past. And so we've gathered a team tonight. We have with us the chairman of the Reparations Committee, Mr. Eric Williams, chief, an African chief, the chairman of the Guyana's Reparations Committee and the deputy chair of CARICOM Reparations Committee, longtime African activist, a leading member of ACDA and other African organizations in Guyana. We have Sister Olive Sampson, who is the CEO of IPADG, the International Decade for the People of African Descent Guyana. And as we know, that organization is an amalgamation of African organizations. It's a coalition of the African organizations coming together to see about implementation of the mandate given by the United Nations in what is now the second decade for the people of African descent. And we are going to be joined later by Mr. Vincent Alexander, who is the chair of IPADG. So please share the link and let everyone know that we're on tonight. And it's a special day, a special night. And this discussion, not new to this forum, not new to this channel, not new to Politics 101, but every time these moments present themselves, we have to treat them as if we have never done them before. That is the burden of African activism in Guyana and other parts of the African diaspora. So let's bring our guests in. Sister Olive Sampson, let's try to get Eric Phillips in. Good evening, Brother Eric, Sister Olive, and welcome to Politics 101.
Good
Thank you,
evening,
David.
David, good evening. Thank you for inviting me to join you
Night,
this evening.
Olive. Good
Hello,
night.
Eric. Good evening.
And all three of us were there this morning on the IPADG watch, and we saw the president of Ghana mounting that podium of the United Nations to present the resolution, which was later voted upon, and it was passed. There were notable votes against. I think Argentina, Israel, and the United States voted against the resolution to make, to deem Africa slavery and the transatlantic slave trade a crime against humanity. Olive, let me start with you. Put in perspective for us the significance of this day and those actions associated with this day.
Thank you so much for that question, David. And again, thank you for participating this morning. Thank you to Brother Eric as well. This is an enormous step forward. This is an enormous step forward to have the nations of the world come together to declare that the transatlantic slave trade or trafficking in persons and slavery were the gravest, taken together, the gravest crime against humanity, the gravest crime. That immediately sets the stage for, well, it brings greater heft to our demand for reparations, and it immediately sets the stage for what should be our next step as people of African descent. It sets the stage for us to become active and to immediately start to work on and strategize how will we make the world How will we make those who have benefited so greatly from our oppression, our suffering, how do we make them come to a just resolution for that crime? It is a crime. And we all know that there are crimes that have to be dealt with regardless of the centuries. In particular, this crime that went on for centuries, this crime that we know is the foundation on which Europe, the United States built their wealth. Every time those of us who have been fortunate to travel to the United Kingdom, to France, to Spain, to Portugal, and we see great palaces and we see gilded items, we see gold, we see all of that, remember that ultimately that belongs to you as an African, because without Africa and people of African descent, those items, that wealth that we see so prominently and proudly displayed would not have been achieved. And so what I'd like to say to us today is that we should step back and think through very carefully what we are going to do next. We as a people, not our politicians, not our organizational leaders, not Chief Eric alone, but we as a people, remembering what Frederick Douglass said to us, words that we should never forget. And that is that power concedes nothing, right, without a demand. And that doesn't mean taking a letter and going to the State House. That means a demand means making it uncomfortable for a government to say no. Making it uncomfortable for a government to say no, right? Now, I noticed that President Irfaan Ali is supportive, and Guyana, of course, voted in support, and I'm very proud of Guyana for doing that. But having endorsed this, we need to bring to the Guyanese government's attention that Guyana today, the state that exists today, is a beneficiary of our work. It's a beneficiary of everything our ancestors did, right? The canals, the entire irrigation system, the very land on which we live would not have existed had Africans not given their lives to clearing it for nothing. And you know what? It's not only the labor, that the thing that is even more egregious and that burns even today, because we see the result of it, is the fact that our language, culture, our sense of humanity was destroyed in order to make us enslaved. And we see it today because as we struggling still for liberation. As Bob Marley spoke, we have to liberate our minds from mental slavery, because in order to keep us enslaved, our minds had to be enslaved as well. And so I think that this is an auspicious day. It is a call not only to government, but it is a call to us as a people to step up, to not be just keyboard warriors. We're not going to win this battle by sitting in sessions like this, typing comments. These are important sessions. These are educational. This is public education and we need it. But there's a next step. And people like Brother Eric and others and Ipada G want to move us forward together. Do not let them pick us apart, because that is what they did when we were enslaved, and that is what they will continue to do. So remember what Frederick Douglass said. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. The question is, what is our demand? How do we make that demand? How do we make that demand? It will not be a demand if we're just typing. Thank you.
Brilliantly said, Olive.
The voice there of Olive Sampson, CEO of Ipada G, invoking the legendary Frederick Douglass, the great African-American abolitionist. Yes, he was an abolitionist, born into slavery, escaping from slavery and becoming a liberator, becoming a leading voice in the abolitionist movement, the anti-slavery movement. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. A clarion call that lives across time, across centuries, because it was grounded and is grounded in the reality of the existence of African people. Of course, it's not confined to us for use, but we must know that that call came from the African mind. And as David Rudder would say, deep within the African belly. Brother Eric, you have been a tireless soldier. And I say soldier deliberately because we have been waging war, as Sparrow said, from the time we were taken from Africa, brought across the Middle Passage to the West Indies, as he says in that song. You have been a tireless soldier, tireless warrior for this day, because I think we have to see this day as the culmination of centuries of struggle and recent times, decades of tireless work against the odds, And as you sat today and watched the Ghanaian president make that resolution, spoke those words to the highest forum of international politics, if you were, what went through your mind?
Thanks, David. And as Olive said, this is a most significant day. And as I listened to him, I realized that for the first time, Africa and its children, global Africa, had come together. Durban, which was 25 years ago, we had several African nations who fought the declaration that slavery is and should have been a crime against humanity. We had Senegal, we had Nigeria, we had large countries who did not support it, but it passed. So today was the culmination of a lot of work in the diaspora, in CARICOM, in Latin America and the Caribbean, in Africa, to make this happen. Just last week, Latin America and the Caribbean came together in Colombia, and President Lula of Brazil strongly supported this. Just last week, we were concerned that this resolution would not pass. You know, we have 122 countries that voted for it, 3 against it, and 55 abstained. And we were worried that countries in the Caribbean, which did not co-sponsor the resolution, would chicken out. But I'm glad to say that none did, and several co-sponsored it. And Brazil and Colombia and Egypt and Algeria and South Africa and Ethiopia and Kenya and of course Ghana stood tall with its children. And we are Africans. People keep forgetting that. We have a war of civilizations going on right now in the Middle East and in the USA that essentially says that we are at the bottom of the racial hierarchy. And that is because of slavery. Slavery interrupted Africa's history. We had great civilizations, from the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, to Mali. We had Timbuktu, 700,000 books. We had the pyramids. Lucy was found in Ethiopia. We had the great Zimbabwe. So slavery interrupted our trajectory. We were the first engineers, first scientists, first farmers, first doctors. The Dogons read the skies. Our women, 45,000 years ago, used the Lubumbo bone as a scientific tool. So today, I felt so happy because last week I was worried. I heard some countries, even in the Caribbean, talking about they're not supporting it because they weren't consulted enough and they wanted to have indentureship into it. We had the Europeans saying we don't want to be talking, measuring who got hurt the most, the typical language. So I was very, very happy that it passed, and it allowed us, it exposed the crooks. Who did not support it? Argentina, Israel, and the USA. If you know Argentina's history, they used enslaved Africans and then brought in other Europeans to dilute the population. They killed out the African population. So that's why I get upset when people are backing Argentina, black people, because they don't understand their history. It's not about soccer. It's about your heritage. How many black folks are in this Argentinian team? So we saw who they are. And those who did not support it, we also saw who they were. There were those who enslaved us and those who were entrapped geopolitically by the USA, who are afraid to use their dignity and their humanity to support something that was wrong. Only Serbia supported it, which is fascinating. So, David, it was a great day. I thank Ipadaji for holding that watch. And this is the beginning, as Olive says. We need to use this momentum to address our inequalities in Guyana. This One Guyana thing is a masquerade of, it's hiding what's really going on here. As I wrote today, and it wasn't in the newspapers, they didn't print it, the GDP of Guyana moved from 6,000 to 38,000. And the GDP per capita for African people barely is about 8,000. There is an obscurity when it comes to African needs. There is a global attempt to erase our history. Today made our history relevant.
Today made our history relevant. In case you're just joining us, tonight we are talking about that resolution introduced by the president of Ghana to deem at the United Nations, deeming enslavement and the transatlantic slave trade as the gravest crime against humanity. It passed, as you heard from Brother Eric there a moment ago, 122 in favor, 50 odd abstaining, and 3 countries, the United States, Argentina, and Israel, voting against it. But it passed. It passed. The United Nations, the highest world forum, global forum of sovereign countries, saying what we Africans always knew. We always knew that slavery was the gravest crime against humanity. We always knew that the Atlantic slave trade was an important part of that crime. So what happened today, in many regards, to paraphrase Stokely Carmichael, it wasn't for us. It was about us. But it was for those who doubted that slavery was a crime and is a crime against humanity. And so it's a beautiful day that we were able to shine the light on something that they wanted to keep in darkness. We're joined by Vincent Alexander, who's the chairman of Ipadaji. Vincent, both Olive and Eric gave their initial thoughts, reflections on the significance of today. You are part of a small group of leaders in Guyana who have braved this rough terrain to speak about slavery, to speak about the transatlantic slave trade, to speak about the condition of African people in Guyana and beyond, and to draw our country's attention to the uncomfortable truths. And that is, as the United Nations itself has said, that anti-Black racism, despite the changes in the laws, despite cosmetic efforts here and there, that anti-Black, anti-African racism is still rooted in the institutions and the systems of governance and sociology and economics in states around the world. As you watch this morning, your own thoughts and reflections.
David, I think it's a critical moment in the struggle for the liberation of people of African descent. And I think it's very, very important for us to localize all that's happening. Because we live in a country where, to some extent, lip service is paid to what's unfolding. But on the contrary, everything is done to ensure that what we are struggling for is not being realized. So today, Guyana would have been counted as one of the countries that voted for this resolution. And so we have got to, at the internal level, to take the struggle to the government, to have them on one hand understand what is it that they voted for, because they tend to have articulations that are quite different to what is intended, and to get them to commit indeed to what they voted for. We have got to educate the mass of Guyanese people that their government has gone out there and made commitments. They made commitments about reparations. They made a commitment again today. They signed the declaration for the decade, but in practice, they do quite the opposite. And they try to rationalize it. They try to rationalize that we have a systems in Guyana that provides for equality, and therefore there's no need for any special attention for the people of African descent. But there are three things in that regard we need to observe. Firstly, that people are identified largely and afforded opportunity of development largely based on the relationship with the land. And that's a fundamental area in which we are disadvantaged, a fundamental area in which the institutions and the laws and the politicians continue to deprive us of that basic thing which is necessary for recognition and for development. And so the struggle has got to be continued. We have to be able to articulate what the UN has articulated in broader terms, that the status of land relations in Guyana, and particularly the purchased lands, represent the remnants of a system that deprived us and continue to deprive us of our right to our lands. And in that regard, we have to be, secondly, make the point which people tend to push back on, that when we talk about slavery, when we talk about enslavement, we are talking about what happened to our foreparents and the consequences of what happened then that's affecting us now. People need to understand it's not just a question of history. It's a question that those systems which were put in place in various ways have been retained and are still affecting us as a people. And therefore, we are not just talking about something that's historic. We're talking about something which is felt even today. And in that regard, again, the land is a critical example of how things are being felt today. We have a legal system that's allowed the state, whether it's at the local level or the central level, to claim our lands, and not only to claim them, but to seek to distribute them away from us, not even distribute them to us, but to distribute them away from us. And that has to be rectified. It is critical. It's foundational to our existence. And so we need to have those understandings. And it should be clearly understood that the state and the government, which is responsible for the state, the largest element of the state, are the beneficiaries and predecessors of what occurred, and the extent to which they are the beneficiaries and or predecessors is the extent to which they have an obligation. They can't say, well, you know, we are now, didn't do it. In the question of the state and government, there's continuity. And once the institutions continue to be in place and the laws continue to be in place and we're governed in the old way, then they have a responsibility because they have inherited and are carrying on what we are fighting against. And therefore, they have an obligation. Now, in that regard, one may well see a problem because if they articulate things quite differently, they may not want to accept that they have that obligation. And therefore, we have to be able to mobilize our people locally and in conjunction with the international community of people of African descent. Take this argument further, take the struggle further, so we can realize what are our rights through a system not only of equality, but a system of equity, which is intended to ensure that we indeed benefit from equality.
Mr. Vincent Alexander, chairman of ITPAD-G, which hosted a watch today as the world turned its attention to the United Nations, where a resolution was introduced by Ghana and voted on, deeming slavery a grave crime against humanity. Today also happens to be the International Day of Remembrance for the victims of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. We on this panel are victims. Most of you in the audience are victims directly. All of you, all of us are victims indirectly of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. So today we remember that grave crime, that horrendous crime against humanity. Remember that crippling blow that went on for centuries. This year happens to be 400 years since the first Africans landed here, 1626. We're now in 2026, 400 years. So lots of anniversaries, lots to talk about as far as the African presence in Guyana is concerned. I will come back to Sister Olive, but before I go to Sister Olive, let me engage you, Eric, Chief Eric, because I think you have these things at your fingertips. Give us a profile of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery in terms of the numbers of people uprooted from Africa, scattered across the Americas, the value of their unpaid labor calculated in today's money. Where did they go? Where did they come from? Where did they go? Because sometimes we take these things for granted, these FACTS, what they call today data. But as we speak, I think we have to constantly remind a stubborn country about the enormity of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery, that it was not just about holding people against their will. It was about the economic consequences for Africa, economic consequences for the Africans in the New World. It was about the sociological consequences. It was about the political consequences. It was about the human rights consequences. So when the United Nations voted today on that resolution. They were not voting on some idle piece of concoction by a few people across the world. They were voting on something that has had a profound impact on the course of the movement of the world. So give us an economic, a socio-economic and political profile of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery, Eric.
Thanks, David. It began in 1441, quite innocently, when 10 Africans were taken to Lisbon in Portugal. And from that time to emancipation, I'm talking about our emancipation in 1838, you could see is almost 400 years this activity went on. It was brutal. It was an age of terror. My phone moved. Can you still hear me?
We seem to be losing Eric there for a minute. I think his time is best. We'll get back on.
David, can you hear me?
We are hearing songs, which means you're connected, but we're not hearing or seeing you clearly. Brother Eric Phillips, they're trying to come back on. He has begun by giving us his introduction to the profile of the transatlantic slave trade and the slavery itself. Olive, let me come to you while Eric is sorting himself out there. Let's see.
If I could comment on what Eric was saying as well.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. I think it's really important. I noticed there was a conversation earlier in the chat about Blood on the River being an excellent read. And I think that is so, and I commend the person who recommended it. But there's another book that I think we should all pay attention to, and it's called Born in Blackness, and the author is Howard French. And Howard French's book really captures in how did Africans and Europeans meet, what caused Europe to look to Africa, and then the slave trade and how it grew. And as Eric said, it started quite innocently. But I think the point that we have to understand, that to me is fundamental to the argument for reparations, it's fundamental to it, but it's not the only thing, is that the reason that Europe turned to Africa is because they came to realize the gold that was circulating in the Mediterranean came from south. They heard about Mansa Musa and his trip from the kingdom of Mali on his Hajj, when he was making his Hajj to Mecca. And for a decade, they sought the source of that gold. The Portuguese did. Portugal at the time, 1441, was an impoverished and very, very impoverished kingdom. Extremely impoverished. They exported what we still take from them, codfish and other fish. That was their main export. Europe was reeling after the Black Plague. After the plague and all the Black Death decimated Europe, Europe's economy was in tatters. It is the slave trade and their involvement across Africa that brought Europe out of an economic death. All of the plantations across the Americas, the stealing of labor from Africa. So this that we're talking about, the modern world that we see here now, that one modern world, the industrialized world, all relied on the foundation of the enslavement of Africans and the theft of resources, which continues from Africa. And I know Brother Eric is back, and he mentioned 1838, but we must remember that, for example, Brazil,
1888.
in 1888, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
so, and there are other smaller pockets of slavery that continued. So I just wanted to use this opportunity to speak to and encourage folks to read that book, to read Born in Blackness by Howard French, that provides a panoramic view and a fundamental understanding of the impact. Why was Europe interested in Africa? And how Europe and the United States and others benefited. They would not be where they are today had it not been for Africa.
And as we go back to,
thank you.
As we go back to Eric to continue his profile, just to remember books written by scholars and activists closer to us, Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, and the classic, another classic, Capitalism and Slavery by Dr. Eric Williams. Eric, you can continue your profile from
Yes.
here.
So David, we hear this number 15 million people were transported. They don't remind themselves of how many Africans were killed on the continent. When a village was attacked, those who were injured were left to die. They starved. The grandparents were left there because they only took young people. And if you were to look at their own numbers, in 1650, Europe and Africa had 100 million people. In 1850, Europe grew to 265 million people, and Africa's population had shrunk to 95. So we're really missing 170 million Africans, not the 15 million that they give us as propaganda. So that is the scope. It was brutal. They turned nations against nations. They said to a particular nation, if you do not give me Africans to take away, I will enslave you. So that was the first divide and rule. They'll give one group weapons, give them sort of minor things of benefit, but that's what happened. So over 400 years, we've lost 170 million people. And that has nothing to do with the devastation of the kingdoms in Africa and how they changed the geography. It has nothing to do with the cultural erasure of our language, our food, our names. It has nothing to do with our religious indoctrination. And people forget that this was initiated by the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church using papal bulls or ecclesiastical laws. There were 10 of them, starting in 1452 with Dum Diversas. You had the doctrine of discovery. So essentially the West dehumanized us, depopulated us, stole our labor, became wealthy off of it. And something that is not well discussed, they stole African indigenous knowledge. The Nok race in Nigeria were doing steel at 10,000 degrees Celsius 500 years before the Europeans came to Africa. And so this led to 1884, because Africa was so depopulated, 170 million people, that 23 nations could meet in Berlin and chop up Africa, because a lot of its males were gone. A lot of their infrastructure was gone. A lot of the kingdoms were destroyed. So this is massive. Now, the Brattle report has basically said that 31 nations owe between $100 and $131 trillion in reparations. Loss of labor, loss of life. But that's only here. What about Africa? That's not been accounted for. So it is brutal. I think we are forced to underestimate the impact by them telling us it's 15 million. Even our own historians fall into this trap. We have to write our own history. We have to define who we were, because they keep telling us we were not human. Yet you look at the pyramids, which they can't even rebuild today with the best technology. You look at the Dogons, looking at the celestial stars. You look at the Lubumba bones, you look at all the things that we had thousands of years before they came to Europe, came to Africa. But we must also not forget, as much as we're dealing with the Atlantic slave trade, that we had the Muslim or Arab slave trade for 11 centuries. And if you go to Tanzania and that part of the world, that's a whole different route. So we have been degutted. Our culture has been, they attempt to destroy it, but it's in our hearts, it's in our DNA. They indoctrinated us. Africa has 3,000 nations that speak 2,000 languages. All of that is lost. You want to hear about French? There are 23 French-speaking countries in West Africa. Of course, North Africa is Arabic. We have English, we have Portuguese, we have Spanish. The French still have colonies all over the world. So the impact cannot be estimated because the truth has not been written about what truly happened holistically, starting from 500 AD, 500 BC, 5000 BC, all the way down. So that's a quick summary, but they tried to take away our culture, they tried to take away our spirit. There's a global hierarchy of race that was created by them so that they could justify that we are half humans and therefore were born to be slaves. And yet, civilization started in Africa, and that's where humankind began. So I just want to close out with that. The scope is massive, and we need to write about it. We need to get around this 15 million. It's not 15 million. Go to their own, but you have AI now. Go to AI and ask, what was the population of Africa in 1650? What was the population in Europe in 1650? And you'll get the numbers. They can't hide it anymore because AI allows you to search.
Brother Chief Eric Phillips there giving us a profile of an overview, if you will, of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. And Eric is making a plea there that is extremely important. Vincent, the methodology is important. The questions that you ask are important. If you confine it just to those who cross the Atlantic, then you get 15 million, as Eric is arguing. If you widen your methodology to include all those who perish from the beginning to the end, then you end up with different numbers. We come to Guyana, Vincent, 1626 to 2026, and we continue to talk about that period, not because we want to gaff about this history, but we want to point to the present. And you and the rest of us are still toiling in the vineyard to make sense for the rest of Guyana about the linkage between the present and that past from 1626. The International Decade of the People of African Descent talks about recognition. And I want you to put in perspective, Vincent, because as we remember today, victims of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade, talk to us about the notion of victimhood as they manifest themselves today. Make the linkage for us between the profile of the African in Guyana and the rest of the diaspora, but Guyana in particular, since we're talking about our country. Make that linkage between the condition of the African today and what began in 1626, sorry.
Thank you very much, David. First of all, I think we ought to look at the way in which the Guyanese society evolved. Let's start off with an assumption that you had the indigenous people. Then you had the arrival of the Dutch. The Dutch arrived in the first instance to trade and then got involved in attempts at enslaving the indigenous people. That didn't quite work out. So that at the very inception of the evolution of Guyana beyond the presence of the indigenous people, you have an antagonistic, superior-inferior relationship at the very foundation. And with every phase of our development, that relation, that hierarchy of inferior and superior was engendered. So when they failed with the Amerindians, they brought the people of African descent. And a hierarchy emerged there with the colonizers at the top of the ladder, with the Amerindians second, indigenous people second, and with the people of African descent at the bottom of the ladder. Having used the indigenous people to police the people of African descent. And that's why you don't have such great evidence of the Maroon attempts in Guyana, because very often those attempts were raided by the indigenous people, dismantling the attempts at Maroon villages, capturing and decapitating people of African descent. And so we have that hierarchy emerging that continued with the coming of the Portuguese, that continued with the coming of the Chinese, and the coming of the Indo-Guyanese. But in all of that, inter-ethnic antagonism and anachronism, the people of African descent are at the bottom of the ladder. And so what has emerged in some regards is not a pure system of black and white in relation to Guyana. What has emerged is a system, there is a lot of interracial oppression, interracial domination, the people of African descent at the bottom of the ladder. We have to look at Guyana within that context. We can't look at Guyana merely in the question of whether they brought slaves, there was enslavement, and now we're independent, and there's no longer enslavement, because we built structures that continued to impose oppression in a hierarchical manner, where the people of the African descent were at the very base, and therefore other ethnic groups became involved in the institutions and the arrangements that sought to impose exploitation and oppression of the people of African descent. So, for example, in the realms of employment, in very recent times in our history, we could see that people of African descent were not able to gain employment in certain sectors.
The banks.
They were not able to gain employment in certain sectors. We can see that the people of African descent were not able to continue in their agricultural engagement because of the flooding of the lands. But even as that was happening, the people of Indian descent were being given lands to have parallel involvement in agriculture, parallel to the sugar industry. And there were those who came out of the sugar industry and embarked purely on land ownership and agriculture, whilst the people of African descent were pushed into the public sector and mining to some extent. And even as they were pushed into those areas, in more recent times it's contended that they have clawed onto those areas to the detriment of others, when in fact they were pushed into those areas for their survival, whilst others were given opportunities that were more natural to their being. Agriculture, for example, people of Indian descent, trade, the people of the Portuguese and Chinese and commercial activities, and the society is still stratified in that way, in terms of who is involved in what, and it is stratified and stigmatized as well. So not only stratified but stigmatized, and we see that the foundation of the society, which is the economic activities, business have fallen into the hands, I shouldn't say fallen, have been put into the hands of people other than the people of African descent. And then, notwithstanding that evolution, it is claimed that we don't have a business orientation or we don't like agriculture. When in fact we were pushed out of agriculture systematically and not allowed into business also systematically, impacting in some regards our psyche as well. And now we are condemned, criticized, and considered to be inferior for those things. You know, you can always hear when there's a change of government, there's a contention that people of African descent can't manage anything. There's that blatant contention, we can't manage anything. And it's really an expression of superiority. And therein lies an element of the racism which we are subjected to. And in all of this, our education system does not seek to bring awareness to these realities to us and across the board. And so it raises the whole question of recognition, because we're not recognized for who we are and for what we did. We are recognized for the positions we were pushed into in a very conscious and intended manner. And so we have to overcome that system of de-recognition, so to speak, that has occurred, and the way in which the social systems, the economic systems, and other systems treated us in a process of de-recognition of the persons who we are, in terms of starting from the people who were brought from the continent. Because, you know, let's look at the apprenticeship, for example. The so-called abolition of slavery, apprenticeship, suggesting that we needed to learn. When in fact, the people who were brought were learned people whose knowledge was exploited. And even in the instance where we had enslaved people who were born locally and born into illiteracy and things like that, because of the continuous need for replenishment, you had a continuous process of Africans being brought, and therefore skilled and knowledgeable people being brought, but yet they're said to be illiterate and barbaric and all of that. And we get to the point of abolition, and they said, well, these people have to learn. Learned people have to learn. People should well understand that why the 1763 revolution was possible was because we had leadership and learned people, learned in warfare, learned in agriculture, learned in management, who were able to cause us in a very disadvantageous environment to survive for the period that revolution survived. And the spirit of the revolution has survived beyond the revolution. And that is what we're talking about today. The spirit of the revolution, which has put us in a position where we are still disadvantaged, but conscious and struggling for our ultimate liberation. So that where we are at today is a system where there are remnants that are being sustained and maintained in an environment where a hierarchy was created, and therefore there are those who have an interest in that hierarchy who are seeking to maintain it. And in a circumstance where you have the evolution of class with a certain ethnic group dominating the so-called economic class, and therefore is ethnic and class interests that seeks to maintain the status quo of which we are the objects, of which we are the objects. And so our own consciousness has to bring us to the understanding of that, an articulation of that, as one of the pillars upon which we seek to liberate ourselves from the ongoing oppression. It's no longer a case of black and white. It's a case of a society that's evolved in a particular way where there was a social ladder that Dr. Jagan recognized. And we are involuntarily at the bottom of that social ladder, and we have to consciously seek to retain our status as people of intellect, people of skills, and people who have originated a civilization.
Vincent
David,
Alexander.
David, can I make a link to what
Yes,
was
please,
just said?
please do, Eric.
And this hierarchical structure in Guyana. This has been made worse by oil. If I'm Chinese in Guyana, I can go to China and get technology, capital, networks, partners, products, materials, and services. If I'm Indian, I can go to India and get all of those. If I'm Portuguese, I can do that in Western Europe. Because of the decapitation or the disconnection between Africa and people of African descent, we can't go to Africa and get capital and technology and products and services and networks and partnerships because we were relegated to the bottom of the ladder and disconnected from that. And so this is why now with oil, as much as the argument is made that everybody could make money, we do not have access to all of these basic things: technology, capital, networks, partnerships. We can't form joint ventures because the joint venture partners are India, China, and the West. And because we don't have an air bridge or a sea bridge between here and Africa, by the way, Colombia and Ghana just signed an agreement last week to have a ship between the two, and Ethiopian Airlines and Air Peace are looking to do air flight between Colombia, Ethiopia, and Ghana, and between Barbados and Ghana, because we don't have that infrastructure. And this is what basically what Vincent was saying. We were involuntarily put into this bottom of the ladder and deprived of the use of all of our skills that we brought here, which indigenized Guyana and made Guyana wealthy. So everybody has benefited from us. We were chased out of rice. We were burnt out of rice. We had 35,000 acres of rice in Mahaika. We were burnt out, but others were paid to go into rice.
David, I want to add just a wee bit to what Eric said. That we see where the Indians can go back to India for the purposes of technology and things like that. The Chinese are actively involved in that right now. Even if we were to have the air and the sea connections, the underdevelopment of Africa
Yes.
is a part of the process that has disadvantaged us.
Yes.
Right? It's an underdevelopment of Africa,
Yeah.
which has removed that base that we can return to in the process. Africa itself is in the process of repairing.
Yes.
But I would like to.
It happens in other places where other groups can turn to for so that I'm not saying we shouldn't turn to, but I'm saying that in turning to, the historical evolution has interfered with the benefits others have in their turning to.
I know Olive wants to say
Olive,
something.
sorry,
Let me
Olive,
sing
jump right in.
very quickly. When you look at the asset distribution in Guyana, land, forestry, mining, TV licenses, radio licenses, banking, all the infrastructure for development has been given to others. Who has the most lands owned in Guyana other than the government? In mining is Alfonso. I could go on and on with specificity, which I wouldn't do. Who controls the total value chain in tourism? The Portuguese. Airlines. You have spas. You have shipping lines. I mean, it is well ethnically stratified, and it's been like that for a long while, and it's being reinforced.
Yeah.
Olive, come right in, Olive.
I couldn't, there's nothing there that has been said that I would disagree with, and I wish we could emphasize it even more. But I'd like to add, to make put a finer point on all of this. It's not only that we are at the bottom of the ladder, but we are at the bottom of the ladder in a corralled space. Our space has been limited. We have been corralled into a space.
Yes.
And let me explain what I mean. When Guyana was a British colony, every single person at the head of every agency was British, right? So ultimately, they were able to make the decisions on who got what, where, etc. And we are exactly back there now. There's a power, a certain group of people control all of the levers of power across the board. In every government office, all the way down, we go in, we don't see ourselves. We see persons who don't look like us. And our young people are thinking more and more, I cannot achieve that. That does not belong to me. It's the same way we felt when we were a British colony.
Yeah. So
we have been put at the bottom of the ladder, corralled in a space. So even if we went to Africa and some wealthy Nigerian showed an
want to do a deal,
we are not allowed into those spaces anymore. And I want to make this point to your audience, David. Excuse me. And that is, we are victims of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. Yes, we are the descendants of those who suffered it, but we are still victims. But we must not be buried by our victimhood. We must not allow that idea of being victims to cripple us. We have to fight. No one who is benefiting, everybody else above us on that ladder, they're benefiting. They're never going to give that up. But we have to make a demand for recognition, justice, and development. And this year, this 400th year, just like how today was a critical day, this 400th year is extremely important. And Eric, I want to say to you that we would really like to work with you on a year-long series of events. Guyana should not go a full year without having commemorative stamps.
We will, Olive.
This is a time for us to teach our history. But our history is deliberately being kept away from our people, because to the degree that they are educated about it and they understand how we got to where we are, they will not allow themselves any longer to be oppressed and corralled into this space that gets smaller and smaller, and more the depravity of what they suggest as our culture becomes more and more outlandish, and we lose our youth, and we lose the respect for ourselves.
Yes. Olive, we will connect with you next week, because we've been talking to Stanley Greaves and a lot of people, and we've come up with this concept of 400 years of freedom. From when we were fighting in Africa on the sea, and then we landed on the estates in 1763 and 1823 and 1834, and the village movement, everything we've been doing, the cooperative movement, the labor movement, everything we've been doing has been fighting for freedom. So I agree with you. We have to have a full year program, and we have to have agency in it. We have to define it.
We have to define it, and we need to have, and I'll say it here on this program, because I'd like people to demand, we need a national commission to celebrate the 400th anniversary of not to celebrate, I'm sorry, wrong language, to observe and to commemorate the 400th anniversary of our arrival and our creation of that space, right? That we call,
Olive, we hide our truth.
Other people now derive great wealth that is still based on the foundation that we laid unpaid, blood spilt, name lost, culture lost.
You know, Olive, when I say this, people think we're being racist. Had it not been that the British did not pay our ancestors well after emancipation, there would have been no indentureship.
No.
And if there's no indentureship, Africans and Amerindians would own this whole country right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the
So
British,
the British
very
have been
structured.
instrumental in
They
so
were
many different
absolutely.
ways.
The
Yeah.
British, I mean, let us just be honest. I'm sorry, David. I hope I'm not.
No, go right ahead.
So let us be honest, right? We know, because of all this time, all of the work that's been done, all of the research, and in many ways, AI and other access to information that we did not have, at least when I was going to school. We now know, looking back, the brutality of the British, the callousness, the theft, the dishonesty, right? We have lost all respect for that, for them and their leadership. We know that they never meant well, they still don't, by the mere fact that they today abstained along with
Yes.
the EU.
Yes.
So
I
we
know,
must not
Olive.
hold them up any longer. We hold them in absolutely no, we do not put them on a pedestal. We recognize that we have been wronged, that we have been wronged in countless ways, that crime continues to affect us, and we are not going to sit by and allow this to continue. Allow the current leadership of the country to learn from the British, learn their methodologies of oppression, and repeat
Trump's
them,
methodology.
which is exactly what is happening. They are not coming up with anything new. They're doing what the British showed them to do, and we must not allow it.
Olive, you know that 171 of the 193 countries in the United Nations were invaded, plundered, or attacked or colonized by the British.
Yeah,
That's all you need to know about the British.
Gaza
is the British.
That's who the British are. And the thing is this, someone put in the chat, they call us lazy. We built the Western Hemisphere, right? We built this economy from Canada. Well, a little less Canada. There were slaves in Canada, but let's say the United States on down to the tip of Tierra del Fuego.
The whole of Latin America.
Right.
Yeah.
We built that, and then now that they have gotten all they want and they have relegated us into the corners of their countries, then they say we don't know how to do this, we don't know how to do that. We must turn that. Our young people must learn that has never been true. They must learn our history. They must know that all that we did to teach. Right? The fact that in 1838,
humanize the spaces we've been in. We've always humanized the spaces.
In 1839, when the first indentured laborers arrived, unlike our ancestors, they did not swim ashore through swamps infested with snakes and other terrors to clear the land. They arrived at a Stelling on a boat and walked down Brick Dam, which was already built, and past the public buildings, which we had already built. All of that infrastructure was in place in 1839 when indentured people arrived. And we must know that. We must know that we built Guyana. And we must know we have a place there, and that all of these efforts that are being made to deny us, right? We must know that those are wrong, that that's an injustice, and that we are prepared to fight. And in that fight, we must do it together, because otherwise they will pick us off one after the other.
Vincent Alexander, you are free to come in, and
but
there is no discrimination here.
Of the hierarchy,
Yes, Vincent.
What is critical in this era is for us among ourselves to engender the kind of consciousness, because unless we do that, then nothing is going to happen for us. It's not going to happen for us. We have to do it for ourselves. And so we are challenged to close ranks, to raise consciousness, and to be involved in the kind of activism that will impact the nation in a positive way for us and for the nation. And I think we need to underscore that we have historically made a significant, major, fundamental contribution, continue to make a contribution, but in fact, if we occupy the space that really belongs to us, we can make even a greater contribution to our benefit and the benefit of all. And I think that should also be recognized. It should be recognized that in many regards, what has evolved is classism, where others who can also be seen to be sufferers sacrifice their own well-being in ethnic solidarity, and that what is required is, to a large extent, a degree of ethnic solidarity as well, in an attempt to destroy that hierarchy. Because even as there is that hierarchy, in each of those groups, there is a fair amount of really among the Indo-Guyanese, particularly among the Indo-Guyanese, there's a fair amount of oppression and suppression based on institutional and other arrangements. And what we have, in a sense, is what the planter class and the landed class of the Indo-Guyanese sought to introduce after indentureship. That was Indian colonization which would see the emergence of an Indian higher class taking advantage of all others, but relying on solidarity, ethnic solidarity, for their survival.
David, there's also another trap that we need to be aware of. This is the religious trap. Because what's happening in Guyana now is that we're celebrating religions instead of ethnicities as a way of diluting our Africanness. So there's a big holiday, it's religious, everybody's involved, there's all sorts of money spent. But we were the first Muslims in Guyana. I don't know if people realize that. And so this religious angle now I see being used more and more to say that you're not African, you're Muslim.
Yes. Vincent Alexander, Eric Phillips, Olive Sampson, warriors down here in Guyana. Today is a day of remembrance, remembering the victims of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery itself. A day when the United Nations took a big step in the direction of repairing the damage of those undertakings. We were talking tonight about the importance of today, and we recognize that at the level of the United Nations, the moves are symbolic. We must put meat on the bones of what the United Nations is coming up with, meaning that we in Guyana and Trinidad and Suriname, Barbados, St. Lucia, United States, wherever we are, that we have to become soldiers, we have to become activists in this quest of reclaiming our humanity, because that is what has always been at stake. Sister Olive invoked tonight, Frederick Douglass, that power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and never will. And that Frederick Douglass coined that formulation in the heat of struggle, a slave himself, an enslaved person himself, running away from slavery and emerging as one of the most potent voices of his time for liberation of the African and for the liberation of oppressed peoples all over the world. We continue in Guyana to witness attempts at silencing the African as African, introducing false motives and false notions, telling us that the cooperatives are useless, telling us that money is more important than wealth. We have our work cut out. But some of us have decided that we are not giving up. And so as we take our leave tonight,
David, allow me to remind the listening audience
Vincent,
that on Sunday,
yes,
AGDA has organized for the community to come out to have a thank you march. Sunday, 4 p.m., opposite Parliament Building, the Assembly, to have a thank you march for the Cuban Medical Brigade, a brigade which is departing Guyana under the kind of oppression that we are talking about. Though it is cross-border oppression, they're departing, and we're coming out in solidarity with them for the solidarity that they have shown us over the years in our quest for liberation, and particularly in the field of medicine, where they have been the backbone of our medical system and the attempts to make a society a healthy one. So please, all are invited. Sunday, 4 p.m., opposite Parliament Building. We'll be walking down to the Square of the Revolution and to have some presentations there in solidarity with the Cuban people, who are now at the center of the oppression, which started all those years ago.
Thank you very much, Vincent. And I add my voice, and I shall be reminding you in the coming days of that event, which is a pivotal event. My brother, Walter Rodney, when the Cubans sent troops across the Atlantic to Angola to beat back the terror of apartheid, he said Fidel Castro is the blackest man alive. And I will remember that because it taught me something about race. And so, thanks to the Cuban Brigade, is in order. And I shall see you, we shall see you on Sunday. Thank you very much, Vincent. Thank you very much, Eric and Sister Olive. Thank you very much. Let us continue to fight with all our might, because the banner of Ethiopia must always be held aloft. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
And to you, the audience, always a special thanks. Without you, we cannot do this. The African in Guyana is at a bad point. But as the young man in Aslington told me yesterday, Dr. sometimes you have to go low to get back high. And we end on that note tonight. We shall overcome, we will overcome, but not without struggle, because power concedes nothing without a demand.